Okay, in this video, we're going to have a look at a feature called slices, which is effectively also a way to filter your tables, right? So currently, in order to insert a slicer, we've got to go to the tab, the Pivot Table Analyze tab. Now you'll notice that if I'm not clicked in the pivot table, that tab doesn't appear there. Just note that. So the moment you click in there, the tab will then appear. So we're going to Pivot Table Analyze and we say Insert Slicer. So we click on that. And let's assume we're going to do a slicer on region. So, and I say, okay. So immediately this is what appears, and this is effectively what a slicer is. So what it is you can simply click on the options. If I click on that, you can see the numbers are now showing for the northern region. If I click southern region, it's showing the southern region. It's also important to note that I do actually also have a filter here in the filter field. You can see this region is listed over there. So as I make changes to as I click onto the slicer, it'll automatically change that as well in terms of the filter, so it will be consistent. Similarly, if I go here and I said, for example, select northern and eastern, and I said okay, automatically both of those will also highlight on the slicer. So these two will always be consistent with each other. If I need to select multiple items on the slicer, I've got to tick on this multi-select, or I could use the Alt-S key. Once I do multi-select, I can then select multiple items. If this is ticked off, then when you select something, it'll only select a single item. All right, so that's the first thing about slices. What you should also know is that the moment you add a slicer, you'll see a separate tab on the top that's related to slices specifically. So once the slicer is selected, you'll be able to click on the slicer tab in the ribbon, and there's a number of options over here. So for example, the first thing I can just show you is you can change the colors, the formatting, right? So let's say I got a multiple select and I wanted it to be a different color. I can click on the drop down. I could even use a dark option like that. So whichever type of formatting you prefer. Let's leave it on this yellow one over here. All right, so we can now going to go ahead and insert another slicer just to show you that you can insert more than one slicer at a time. So if I click there in the pivot table area, I go to the pivot table analyze and I say insert slicer. Now I don't only have to insert slicers for anything that's in the filter area. I can insert a slicer for any of these fields. So let's just say I do a slicer for a customer name. Now I say okay. And you see it just drops it over there, so I can hold it and drag it and place it wherever I want. So let's place it over there. Now, this one you can see it's cut off. The names of the customers are cut off, so we can actually resize the slicer as we need to. And one of the things I want to show you is that in the slicer tab in the ribbon, you can also increase the number of columns. So let's make this slicer 3 columns. So we've got 3 different columns, and I'm going to expand it in size. So here we can actually now see all of the different customers quite easily. And I can now select multiple customers like this. So this is all selecting a single customer. So when I click on discount deals, it's only selecting one customer. And now you can see this is the sales for that particular customer over there. To clear a slicer, you see if I click on this icon, it clears the filter. So it then just selects everything. So you see now I've got all the regions selected. Similarly, if I want all the customers selected, I click on that clear filter and all the customers are selected. All right, so what I'm now going to do is I'm going to show you can actually delete a slicer quite easily. So if I just click on the slicer and I've got it highlighted, I can simply click on the delete button on my keyboard and that slicer is now being deleted. Now, one of the things that is important to know is that even if you delete a slicer, if that slicer was applying a filter, that filter would still apply to your data. So often to be safe, what I would recommend is just going in and clearing all the filters just to be sure. All right, so now what I want to show you that's quite unique about slices is that you can actually connect a single slicer to more than one pivot table. So what I'm going to do here in this particular pivot table, let's actually move the years out of it. And let's actually add in the sales as well as the gross profit, right? So we've got sales and gross profit by different product category. Let's further assume that we wanted to insert another pivot table. So over here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over here and let's insert another pivot table. And we're going to go insert pivot table. Same, we're going to leave the default settings and we are going to select the region. And for the region, we are going to select the sales amount and the gross profit, right? And what I'm actually going to do with this pivot table is I'm going to move this pivot table by selecting the whole pivot table. Remember, we can do that by using the select entire pivot table. I'm going to use the cut. So I'm cutting this pivot table and I'm actually going to place it here on the same sheet as the other one. So I'm going to paste that pivot table over there. All right, so now we've got this pivot table listed over here, and I'm just going to highlight those and expand the columns, right? So these are effectively now two separate pivot tables. The one is showing the data by product category, and the one is actually showing it by region, right? Now what I want to do for the, let's just actually remove the region out of this. So this one is actually showing for all regions. So at this particular point in time, we're actually going to delete this one as well. The other way to delete it is to right click and say remove, right? So we can actually remove it, and now it's removed that slicer. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a slicer for the years. So what we're going to do is going to go to in pivot table, and we're going to insert a slicer, and the slicer is basically going to be based on the years. So here's a slicer based on the different years. So if we're showing 2019, you can see now it changes the data, right? 2020, 2021. So it's showing us the different data depending on which year we selected. Now, however, this particular pivot table is not linked to the slicer. When we created this slicer over here, you can see as I change, it's only changing the values here because it was only linked to this particular pivot table. For this particular pivot table that I've got here, it's not linked in any way to this slicer, but we can actually link it. So the way we do that is when we've selected the slicer, in the slicer tab, we go to report connections, right? And you can see that it's linked up to this pivot table here, which is pivot table 11. Now, how to see the pivot table names, remember, just to cancel, to just show you, this pivot table, when I click on it and I go to the pivot table analyze, there's the name over there. So if I had to call this, for example, product, I can rename it, product cat pivot, right? I'm just giving it a new name so we know what it is. So product cat pivot, and I'll call this region pivot. So when I click on this one, it's called pivot table 1. If I click on that, and I can call it region pivot, right? So going back to this option, when we clicked on our slicer, if we go here into the slicer tab and we say report connections, we can see that the slicer is connected. The tick is only on for the product cat pivot, which is this one over here. If I now tick this on as well and say okay, when I click on the years, they both change. So now when I click on 2021, this particular pivot table is going to show me the data for 2021 and this one as well. If I turn on the multiple select and I select 2020 and 2021, then both of these are now showing me the data for 2020 and 2021. And similarly, you could have multiple slices and actually connect them all to both of the pivot tables, or even to 3 or 4 or as many pivot tables as you like.